right, thank you for joining me today. This is Jennifer Billingsley. I'm the DNP Program Chair, and we are going to be discussing the role of the chairperson and going into a little bit more detail about the DPI project and the DPI courses. So first I'm going to discuss the chairperson role. It's a really unique role within the university and within the doctoral program. We really see you as a coach and a mentor for students. As you guys know, this is these are doctoral students, and they've been through their bachelor's, they've been through their master's, and now they really are looking for that coach and mentor. So we want you to recognize that this is truly a learning journey, and be able to emphasize that with your students. We're also aware of, the students' workload issues. They do have, most of them have families and working full-time outside of this, which we do respect, but we also want these students to hold to this tight timeline to be able to deliver an excellent manuscript when they're complete. We also believe that a chairperson is a champion. We want you to, really believe in the student and assist them along the way to be able to design, propose, conduct, and report on their project. We see you as an advocate, as we do with all our faculty and students. And then a manager, certainly a manager. You're tracking the progress of these students, anticipating their needs. As you become more familiar with the students, individual needs, you can anticipate what would be most helpful for them. You do want to initiate structure with these students. We want them to be successful. There is quite a bit of structure that is built into the program as far as deliverables and weekly deliverables. And we certainly request that you hold them to these timelines. We do not suggest giving students extensions on assignments, particularly in this first course, 955, as we do want them to progress to have chapters 1 through 3 in a strong proposal to submit to their first AQR by week 8. You want to be a manager, you're the committee preparation and defense logistics, right? Of course, your student's going to help you with this, but the committee consists of you, their chair, which are also the faculty for the DNP 955, 960, and 965. And you are also on the committee is a content expert. The content expert is the person that the students elicits for that role. So you three will be the committee, and the student is responsible for communicating with both of you. Leader, that goes without saying. You're leading the committee, the chair defenses, and regularly following up with the student. Arbiter, we know that can happen at times. You want to assure rigorous standards, programmatic standards, and of course we are completing a project which is not research, but very, very similar to research, in which we do go through IRB, and we need to make sure that we are communicating with our students about human subjects protection. These students have gone through CITI city training to review the ethical standards for human subjects. So each of the 3 DPI project courses have specific deliverables and discussion forum requirements. Your chair, you will be editing manuscripts based on the DPI proposal and final template criteria. Highly recommend that you look at both of these templates and make sure that your students see these as well, so they know what to expect. And remember, committee members, you have 7 days to return feedback. Some of your students during crunch time will want you to have that turned around within 24 hours. However, per GCU policy, you do have 7 days to review and give them the appropriate amount of feedback. Learners, our students are responsible for ensuring their submissions incorporate sound formatting and data and details. I think I go into this later, but you are not these student editors. In this first class, I highly recommend that you identify if these students need APA assistance. They need to be able to have scholarly writing, APA and formatting down they need to understand that completely for submission of this manuscript. My recommendation is to tell them sooner than later if they need some assistance with their writing skills and APA. This last note is really, talking about the learner's responsibility to ensure that these manuscripts are edited and to seek statistical help if they need it. We do request, all of GCU faculty and chairs, we do request that you have respond to your students within 24 hours within the classroom. That is a standard policy throughout GCU. That also holds me accountable to that as well. If you have questions, I like to be available to you at all times. And then working with those other committee members, basically the content expert, to make sure that they are giving timely feedback as well. And you're responsible for committee or learner-only meetings via phone or Zoom, and providing any kind of feedback to me if it's needed. I think we've talked about the communication within the committee and with the students. You want to ensure, sometimes we have situations in which the learner possibly has more access to their content expert or works in the same area as their content expert, and they may rely on them a bit more than their chair. And that's okay to get their input, but you must, as their chair, be in the loop. And so sometimes it makes, you may have to gently remind your students that you do need to remain in the loop with all of their communications and feedback that they're receiving from their content expert. This is the DC Network. If you're not familiar with the DC Network, I highly recommend that you take a look. There is a lot of information on here. You have a welcome page, a blog page. You have specific DNP folders for each of these courses that have several resources available to you and your students. And then when you go into these chair classes, you also have what's called a learner dissertation page, LDP page. And this is basically within DC Network. It is you, your student, and your content expert that have access to this. This is just one forum that you have available to you so that your content expert can also get information about manuscripts and can communicate with the content expert. I will say from experience, a lot of chairs also have the content expert's email and may use that as well. So project overview, as I said, the chair and the content expert and the student make up the committee. You are going to be developing, the student's going to be developing their proposal, which is chapters 1, 2, and 3 in DNP 955. And then in 960, they will have IRB approval. We'll talk about that in a little later. But by the end of their 965, they should have all 5 chapters written and approved. Both of the templates have step-by-step resources and which profile the exact content that's required in each section of the DPI project. All the DPI and IRB templates are found under those specific folders as well. Timeline, this just kind of gives you an idea of what the student's been working on. By the time they get to 955, they already have a pretty good idea of what their project is hopefully going to entail. In 801, they have completed a PICO statement. 815, they have completed 10 strategic points draft, which includes their problem statement, their clinical questions, all the way down through data analysis. In 820, they do another draft of the 10 strategic points based on the previous feedback, and they also complete their literature review draft. It's important to note that this is a draft. Which will eventually go into chapter 2. This is a draft that they will continue to add to during their proposal phase. DNP 830 is when they complete that city training. They do have a prospectus draft and then review potential data analyses that they might be using in their project. And then we have these 3 courses, 955, 960, 965, with the assigned chair, who is also their faculty. And then we want to emphasize that students may need to go into extension courses. And we have as many as they need, but they would go right into 965 after 966 after 965. Some common situations that happen, students receive IRB approval later than expected. Students are not progressing, not making the required revisions, and that can set them back. They may have more time that they want to implement their intervention, and so they may need more time in that aspect. But remember, after 965, they must have a rigorously completed DNP project manuscript that is approved by the dean. So we need to emphasize that there are potential situations that students may go into these extension courses. This is what 955 looks like as far as the weeks go. In week 2, they're going to be formalizing their 10 strategic point proposal. Week 3, they go into that Chapter 2 literature review. Now remember, they've started on this already in 820. Week 4, they have that methodology section, and then week 5, they do the introduction. Week 8, this is a benchmark assignment, and they do need to submit a 1 through 3 proposal, because this will go through academic quality review. And that's where we pull that from. So they will need to have that submitted. The AQR review can take up to 7 to 10 days, and they'll get their manuscript back in their next course. There is a week between, unlike all the other courses in this program, there is a week between all of the project courses. So you'll have 8 weeks of 955, a week off, and then 960, 8 weeks, a week off, and then 965. 960, the main goal of 960 is submitting to IRB. And we will give you a Zoom instructional video on that as well. Usually the first week of 960, IRB usually will hold a Zoom conference so that we can go step by step and answer any questions. And we also have several manuals and step-by-step instructions to assist with the IRB submission. Week 6 and week 7 are Chapter 4 and 5 working drafts. And what we mean by that is the students cannot start their research until after IRB approval. However, they may start working on just kind of the skeleton of their outline of Chapters 4 and 5. You really don't want to keep your students idle. So if they are waiting for IRB approval, they should still be working on something. There's always something to be working on in this doctoral program. 965, week 5, this is the project paper that will go through AQR, their second AQR, Academic Quality Review. We must have a paper that is submitted in that week to be able to give them enough time to the reviewer, the AQR reviewer, to look at it and for the student to make submissions. And then week 7, they will have their defense PowerPoint with the chair and the content expert. And this is the time, even actually a little bit earlier in week 5, we're going to start asking you how these students are doing and if they need to be in extension courses. We want you to keep that conversation open so students are not surprised if they need an extension course. And that would be the point where faculty put an alert into fsi.gcu.edu, which indicates the learner needs to be enrolled in that extension course. And this is something we'll continue to discuss. So, extension courses, if doctoral learners do not complete their 1,000 practice immersion hours, their project within the last 3 classes, they must enroll. And we'll continue to discuss what that looks like. This section goes into the DPI project. We've talked about most of this. We really want it to be doctoral dissertation quality. It must be grounded in clinical practice, and it must be designed to solve practice problems, inform practice directly, or improve patient outcomes. So we need to ensure that you are looking at at the subject of their PICO question and their outline, and ensuring not only that it is appropriate for the DPI, but that it's also feasible, and we'll talk about that. This is just a reminder, as many of you that teach in our doctoral program are PhD. There is a difference between the DNP and PhD. We are focusing more on translational research. So we are looking into improving healthcare outcomes from a nursing standpoint. You're basically looking at translating an existing knowledge and existing guideline into clinical practice to improve patient outcomes. The students should not be creating their own tools. We're not creating new research. This is translational research. So that's what this is going to go through. I'm going to go through this pretty briefly. You can read through this. These are the NOMP recommendations. It's about choosing a topic. It often arises from clinical practice. You're really looking at the benefits of a population rather than an individual patient. It can be done in partnership with other entities. Most of the time, these students will have a project site, somewhat solidified by the time they're coming in. You want to make sure there's an actual gap. And so sometimes students struggle a little bit with this. They should have a significant amount of literature that supports their gap that they're looking at. So their gap should not be something that they're finding new knowledge on. It should be something that's already out there, and they're trying to translate that existing research into practice to improve that gap. This is basically talking about feasibility, using valid and reliable tools, quality improvement. You want to think about assisting your student on measurable outcomes. And then dissemination mode, what that looks like for Grand Canyon is they are automatically published once approved by the dean in the GCU library. And then the students currently have an option to publish in ProQuest as well. If you have not already, please be familiar with the AAC and DNP white paper. I have even sent students this link. This really talks about what the DNP is all about and what this project is all about. And this is exactly what our DPI guidelines are reflected, how they are reflected. This was a great article that was recommended by AACN on 5 criteria for executing a successful DNP final project. And we'll go through each one of these. Easy as pie. The E is enhancing practice outcomes, health outcomes, improving patient outcomes, validating current healthcare systems, or possibly invalidating that system and replacing it with a new efficient model or care based on existing evidence, and then possibly reflecting key provisions in healthcare policies. Culmination, reflecting a culmination of practice inquiry. We want to make sure that our learners are becoming experts in their identified problem or topic and utilize that throughout the doctoral program. We want to make sure that the change that they're proposing, their intervention, can be utilized in real-world settings and that it's sustainable and in a timely manner. And then the clinical setting, ideally, it should be able to interface with electronic health records or meeting expectations with CMS clinical quality measures. Partnerships, the students will really need to understand their stakeholders, right? We know that being leaders in our field, but they certainly want to enlist their stakeholders and have buy-in from their stakeholders. They will quickly understand that that will make their project implementation a lot easier for them. So that's something they need to enlist from the beginning, as well as the site. And then implement, translate, apply evidence into practice. That's looking at the clinical situation and how that could help the society or system. Evaluate. So we do have, that is part of our requirements for this project. This is not a capstone in which the student, like a master's program in which they come up with a plan but don't, you know, actually complete the project and evaluate. So this doctoral program, they do have to complete the intervention and have evaluation. So they will complete data analysis. So PICO reminders, as you're seeing these come through, most of the student PICOs turn into clinical questions. So some things to think about with population or vulnerable population. Your vulnerable populations, as a reminder, is your pregnant women, HIV, homeless, kids, elderly. So they can use vulnerable population, but it is discouraged because it will delay their IRB approval. Their IRB will need to go as a full review through GCU. And then you want to think about, does this learner have access to that population? Is it feasible? Intervention, encourage utilizing valid, reliable tools. We really don't want our students, you know, conducting their own survey tools. Try to find something that's valid and reliable to apply. And then feasibility. Comparison, most of the time there's no intervention or standard of care is the comparison, although we have had students do some two groups and compare. Again, the outcome must be measurable. And remember that, you know, these students can sometimes get themselves in situations where the site wants them to measure 10 different outcomes. So being an advocate for that student, you need to really kind of intervene a little bit and say, you know, for your project, perhaps just this and this we could measure so that we can get really good data and data analysis. Again, feasibility, I think I mentioned that about 10 times throughout this because it's so important with these students that they understand how their implementation and evaluation piece must be feasible. So IRB process, again, we'll go into more detail on this when you are in DNP 960 week 1, but you want to be aware of it. The main thing you want to know is two things, actually, is that every student goes through GCU's IRB, but if the student has a clinical site or facility that has their own IRB, they would need to get approved from that IRB first. So that could potentially affect students that are in 955. So they need to start thinking about that and evaluating if their facility has an IRB. If they do, they need to start having that discussion and see what it takes to submit their proposal to that IRB. If that facility does not have an IRB, they will be required to have a project site approval, site approval form for our IRB, and they would just submit that to GCU's IRB. If the site does have an IRB, they get approved, they would just be exempt through GCU's IRB, but they still apply and they still have a couple pieces of paper documents to submit. So that's something to kind of prepare your students for in 955. You know, ask the students to find out if their clinical site has an IRB, and if so, what do they need to do to apply to that IRB? I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because we'll talk about this a little later. It's just kind of giving you an update that only the chair submits IRB packages, the students sign it, and they get all of the information ready for you, but you are ultimately responsible for submitting that IRB package. Again, there's several resources available in DC Network in the 960 folder. We can go over there, go through those. And then I believe that is it for the presentation. I am going to go ahead and stop the recording.